The British philosopher Bertrand Russell was not a religious man, but he said, it's in our hearts that the evil lies, and it's from our hearts that it must be plucked out. Albert Einstein, I was just talking to someone when I was speaking at Princeton, and I met Mr. Einstein. He didn't have a doctor's degree because he said nobody was qualified to give him one. But he made this statement. He said, it's easier to denature plutonium than to denature the evil spirit of man. And many of you, I'm sure, have thought about that and puzzled over it. You've seen people take beneficial technological advances, such as the internet we've heard about tonight, and twist them into something corrupting. You've seen brilliant people devise computer viruses that bring down whole systems. The Oklahoma City bombing was simple technology, horribly used. The problem is not technology. The problem is the person or persons using it. King David said that he knew the depths of his own soul. He couldn't free himself from personal problems and personal evils that included murder and adultery. Yet King David sought God's forgiveness and said, you can restore my soul. You see, the Bible teaches that we're more than a body and a mind. We are a soul. And there's something inside of us that is beyond our understanding. That's the part of us that yearns for God or something more than we find in technology. Your soul is that part of you that yearns for meaning in life and which seeks for something beyond this life. It's the part of you that yearns really for God. I find young people all over the world are searching for something. They don't know what it is. I speak at many universities, and I have many questions and answer periods, and whether it's Cambridge or Harvard or Oxford, I've spoken at all those universities. I'm going to Harvard in about it's about 2 months from now to give a lecture. And I'll be asked the same questions that I was asked the last few times I've been there. And it'll be on these questions. Where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? What's life all about? Why am I here? Even if you have no religious belief, there are times when you wonder that there's something else. Thomas Edison also said, when you see everything that happens in the world of science and in the working of the universe, you cannot deny that there's a captain on the bridge. I remember once I sat beside Mrs. Gorbachev at a White House dinner. I went to Ambassador Dobrynin, whom I knew very well, and I'd been to Russia several times under the communists, and they'd given me marvelous freedom that I didn't expect. And I knew Mr. Dobrynin very well, and I said, I'm going to sit beside Mrs. Gorbachev tonight. What should I talk to her about? And he surprised me with the answer. He said, talk to her about religion and philosophy. That's what she's really interested in. I was a little bit surprised, but that evening, that's what we talked about. And it was a stimulating conversation. And afterwards she said, you know, I'm an atheist, but I know that there's something up there higher than we are. The second problem that King David realized he could not solve was the problem of human suffering. Writing the oldest book in the world was Job. And he said, man is born into trouble as the sparks fly upward. Yes, to be sure, science has done much to push back certain types of human suffering. But in a few months, I'll be 80 years of age. I admit that I'm very grateful for all the medical advances that have kept me in relatively good health all these years. My doctors at the Mayo Clinic urged me not to take this trip out here to be here. I haven't given a talk in nearly 4 months. And when you speak as much as I do, 3 or 4 times a day, you get rusty. That's the reason I'm using this podium and using these notes. Every time you ever hear me on the television or somewhere, I'm ad-libbing. I'm not reading. I never read an address. I never read a speech or a talk or a lecture. I talk ad lib. But tonight I've got some notes here so that if I begin to forget, which I do sometimes, I've got something I can turn to. But even here among us, in the most advanced society in the world, we have poverty. We have families that self-destruct, friends that betray us, unbearable psychological pressures bear down on us. I've never met a person in the world that didn't have a problem or a worry. Why do we suffer? It's an age-old question that we haven't answered. Yet David again and again said that he would turn to God. He said, "The Lord is my shepherd." The final problem that David knew he could not solve was death. Many commentators have said that death is the forbidden subject of our generation. Most people live as if they're never going to die. Technology projects the myth of control over our mortality. We see people on our screens. Marilyn Monroe is just as beautiful on the screen as she was in person. And many young people think she's still alive. They don't know that she's dead. Or Clark Gable, or whoever it is, the old stars. They come to life, and they're just as great on that screen as they were in person. But death is inevitable. I spoke some time ago to a joint session of Congress last year, and we were meeting in that room, the stature room. About 300 of them were there. And I said, there's one thing that we have in common in this room, all of us together, whether Republican or Democrat, or whoever. I said, we're all going to die. And we have that in common with all these great men of the past that are staring down at us. And it's often difficult for young people to understand that. It's difficult for them to understand that they're going to die. As the ancient writer of Ecclesiastes wrote, he said, there's every activity under heaven. There's a time to be born, and there's a time to die. I've stood at the deathbed of several famous people whom you would know. I've talked to them. I've seen them in those agonizing moments when they were scared to death. And yet, a few years earlier, death never crossed their mind. I talked to a woman this past week whose father was a famous doctor. She said he never thought of God, never talked about God, didn't believe in God. He was an atheist. But she said, as he came to die, he sat up in the side of the bed one day and he asked the nurse if he could see the chaplain. And he said for the first time in his life he thought about the inevitable and about God. Was there a God? A few years ago, a university student asked me, what is the greatest surprise in your life? And I said, the greatest surprise in my life is the brevity of life. It passes so fast. But it does not need to have to be that way. Werner von Braun, in the aftermath of World War II, concluded, quote, science and religion are not antagonists. On the contrary, they're sisters. He put it on a personal basis. I knew Dr. von Braun very well. And he said, speaking for myself, I can only say that the grandeur of the cosmos serves only to confirm a belief in the certainty of a creator. He also said, in our search to know God, I've come to believe that the life of Jesus Christ should be the focus of our efforts and inspiration. The reality of this life and his resurrection is the hope of mankind. I've done a lot of speaking in Germany, and in France and in different parts of the world, 105 countries it's been my privilege to speak in. And I was invited one day to visit Chancellor Adenauer.